Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sunday Shot. It is great to have you back with us on this Sunday morning. I am joined, as ever, by my co-host of the Sunday Shot, Dave Milner. Dave, welcome.
G'day, Joe. G'day, everybody. What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on? I should say that I am joining you today from Gadigal land, from the mighty Eora people. We are joined today by two of our favourite friends of the Sunday Shot, Michael West from the West Report. Hello, Michael. It's great to have you back on.
Hey, Joe. Good to be on the show.
And we have Scott Burchill returning. Scott, it's fantastic to have you back with us as well.
Good to see you.
Now, we were caught out last week because, as most of our viewers know, we are pre-recording our show so we don't have to put you through all of the horrifying technological glitches that seem to plague us perennially. But, of course, by pre-recording, we were not able to talk about the fact that America and Israel had basically declared war on Iran.
Yeah, pre-recording and missing the start of World War III is a bit unfortunate, but we're here to make up for that right now.
And
with some
rectify
extras.
that situation. Before we do, we'll just have a little bit of a roundup of the political news. Parliament was back, which meant that we had to be subjected to Tim Wilson doing his best Billy Joel impersonation. Michael, I wouldn't have thought that it was possible for Tim Wilson to be more annoying than he was when he was last in Parliament, but a little bit of pseudo power, so power within the powerless coalition, seems to have gone to his head, and he's just plaguing us further.
Well, he's pure entertainment. I mean, breaking into song this week, Joe, setting a political precedent, singing in Parliament, making an utter fool of himself. Look, he's entertainment value, but that's about it. He's got no track record on the economy, neither of any of the libs for that matter. But, you know, I'm not sure how much credibility he's got. I'm not sure he adds any strength to their case to be in government at all. And he's so frequently ridiculed by everybody that it just doesn't help Australia having an effective opposition, which is actually what we need when Labor has 84 seats. We need an effective opposition to keep them honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm the only one of the four of you who come from Goldstein, broadcasting from Goldstein, and Mr. Wilson's a regular source of entertainment. I'm still getting over the fact that he took his parliamentary oath on one of Milton Friedman's free market texts.
What? Did that happen?
God, how did we miss that? Oh, he's such a terrible cliche.
Well, I'm still in therapy after that, but he's also halfway through a PhD, I think, at RMIT on econometrics or something. I don't know exactly how far he got.
Not very far, I would imagine.
No.
That sounds worse than Sherry Markson's book about the Bondi shooting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they'd be on par.
They would indeed be on par.
Co-authored by Mr. Rivkin, yeah?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
That one sounds utterly horrific.
So, look, I think if that's the best they've got to offer up, I mean, I bet that in their minds they think he's a great retail politician and that he was very effective on the floor of Parliament this week when he was actually in Parliament, because he did get kicked out at least once. But, yeah, that does seem to be that the best they have to offer. I don't think that will change after the Farah by-election, but it is going to be an interesting one, Scott. We touched on this a little bit last week, but now the election date has been set, I think May 9, so just before the budget. Labor probably not going to run, so it will be hopefully, well, look, people are saying it'll be a two-horse race between the Community Independent and One Nation. One good thing that we've learned is that Helen Dalton who's currently the independent member for the New South Wales seat of Murray, is not going to put her hat in the ring for One Nation. So they were not having her, who does have big community support within the electorate, not having her as their candidate, but they do. I have to say their shortlist is not a bad shortlist when you're looking at people who are embedded within the community. They've got an agribusiness professional, a small business owner from Albury, and a Westpac banker. So, Scott, is this what we can expect now with people who just can see One Nation as perhaps their shortcut into Parliament?
The question is whether people who say they're going to vote for One Nation in the polls hold their nerve on the actual day. And I think the number of candidates in Farrer is going to be as long as the Senate ballot paper, by the sounds of it. So working out who will get the preferences and what the two-party preferred vote will be. I suspect the Conservative side will split themselves up between National Party, I suppose, the Liberals. I don't know whether they're running against each other, plus One Nation.
They've confirmed that they'll both be running. So there'll be a three-way split for the right-wing vote. And the first time, obviously, that One Nation is running with this purported surge of support.
Well, I know that Mr. Hastie hasn't set the opinion polls on fire yet. And we were told by the Australian, as soon as they got rid of Susan Lee, that opinion polls no longer mattered. They mattered up until the point of getting rid of her, and then they suddenly they were no longer of any importance. So they're presumably preparing the way for a pretty ordinary result in Farrer when it actually occurs.
They're certainly both talking down their prospects, which is kind of incredible given that they've held between the two of them, the Nats and the Liberals have held that seat for pretty much ever, I think, certainly over 50 years. So, yeah, look, we'll wait and see. Labor is sort of sitting back. They're likely not to run a candidate, so they'll get behind the community independent Michelle Millthorpe, who pretty much took every single booth in the town of Albury in the federal election, but didn't have as much support out in the regions, which I imagine will be kind of fully flipped for One Nation. So we shall see. Karl Stefanovic is apparently going to be there on the ground as One Nation pick their candidate. What the hell's going on with Karl, Michael? I mean, since he's started this podcast, he just seems to be trying to be the Australian Joe Rogan and tacking right. He's come out and said he regrets now having been a spokesperson and an advocate for people getting vaccinated during COVID. He does seem to be fully embracing the right-wing populism in order to boost his ratings and income from his podcast.
Not sure about income, but probably ratings, Joe. I mean, the template is there. The media revolution has happened. You've got Tucker Carlson, you've got Piers Morgan in the UK. These people have magnified their audience big time since going independent from the mainstream media, because they don't have to stick to any particular agenda. They can be populist, and it's what's going on. The mainstream media is dying very quickly before our eyes, being too close to governments and to corporations. It's not working for them. And so the single podcasters are getting much bigger audiences than mainstream. It looks like that's the end of mainstream, frankly, and it's happened pretty quickly with Trump and so on.
The frustration for me in this environment is that everything Michael said about the mainstream media being too close to power, be it state or corporate, is entirely true. But these right-wing grifters are popping up in this space, and the stuff they are espousing is convenient to power. It's convenient to corporate power. It's convenient to state power, because it is not about challenging it. It is about getting bogged in the weeds of immigration and, all the horrible things that people that aren't white are doing to our society, apparently. That is, if you want people to not be challenging authority, that's where you channel their energy. And people like Karl can present themselves as though they're bastions for truth and the battlers and the ordinary people, but they're actually just keeping us oppressed by the same sickos that are running the world right now.
I think the other issue is that the mainstream media, particularly those breakfast shows, are not setting the news agenda anymore for the day, and they were used to that, as the newspapers were. That cycle, that timing cycle of everyone taking their lead from what was in the papers, and then the news breakfast follow-ups, it seems to have been broken, and I presume that Stefanovic is recognising that he's no longer the influencer or influencer, however you say it, that he was. And, he's
Both
looking for
would
another
apply for
way
him.
of, he's trying to reach his audience in another way and be influential. You've got to remember the egos on these people are almost limitless. And if you're not getting it satisfied by getting up at 4:30 in the morning and appearing on breakfast TV, you've got to find it somewhere else, I presume.
Makes sense.
Well, look, we're doing our bit to try and challenge authority. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, we missed the big story of last week by having recorded 24 hours too early. But what we saw was Israel and the US get together and decide to bomb the shit out of Iran. Not even any pretense at any kind of application of international law, nothing. They just decided that they were going to do it. Scott, clearly, I mean, it is, without a doubt, it is illegal. There is no basis in international law for what they've done. I mean, Michael Rubio has basically conceded that. He just said, well, Israel was going to do it anyway. So they were likely to retaliate, and that became the imminent threat. Why have they done it now? Is it just because of the general weakening of all of the Iranian proxies around the world the last couple of years? Nasrallah's death, the fall of the Syrian dictatorship. Is it literally that Israel saw an opportunity? And Trump's dumb enough to go along with it?
It's something like that, I think, yes. The Pentagon and the intelligence services were opposed to this. They told Trump that this would not go the way he thought, but they lost out to neocons, Iran hawks, and the Israeli Prime Minister, who persuaded Trump that this would be something he could put his stamp on for history. Of course, wars never go as planned; they always go awry, and the quick victory that he probably expected hasn't ensued. And of course, the Iranians, being very clever about this, have decided to focus their attention on US bases within the Persian Gulf so that they can apply vicarious pressure on the United States to end the war in the short term, rather than trusting the Americans again in one of those futile negotiations that the Yemanis were running. They've decided the best way to do that is to put the price of oil through the roof, to presumably undermine the security of those economies in the Persian Gulf, potential outflows of refugees out of the region, and to make the costs of hosting US bases beyond the common sense and logistics of those countries. And that's a lesson, of course, we'll come back to this, a lesson Australia might want to consider exactly, because up until now, no one's ever thought there was a cost to this, hosting these bases. And if you look at even the footage coming out in the last few hours, the Bahrain, the UAE, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, they are taking a pounding. And they've only got the leftovers of the anti-ballistic missile interceptors that the Israelis have allowed them to have, and the Americans. And there's a limited number of those, and they take a long time to replenish after they've been depleted. So you've really got a situation where the Iranians are saying, okay, there's not much damage we can do to the United States here directly. We can do some symbolic damage to the Israelis, but we can do real damage to the world economy, and we can do real damage to your, for example, Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain, where it's unsure as to whether some of those ships will be able to return to port, given that there's been extensive damage in many of them. So, the Iranians are playing a waiting game. They want to deplete those anti-ballistic missile interceptors, and they want the costs of the war to be felt by the U.S. consumer, who is believes the price of petrol or gasoline, as they call it, is a sacred right, and shouldn't be affected by anything the U.S. does overseas.
The Iranians have also targeted an Amazon data center in the UAE, which I think shows that their target, as Scott is saying, is basically American imperialism, increasing the cost of that. One of the things I'm really sort of furious with at the moment is that, I mean, this Iranian strategy is clearly decades in the making. It's clearly quite tactically clever. It is leveraging the advantages they have. But we are being presented that this is an unhinged theocracy out of control in the mainstream press, when at the same time we're hearing that US commanders are telling their troops that they're on a mission from God to bring about Armageddon. And at the same time, the Zionist entity has been justifying carpet bombing 8 different countries with its old religious texts. And now we are led to believe, whenever we switch on the television or the newspapers, that it's Iran that's spreading theocratic death. It's completely an inversion of the truth of the situation, which we've all acknowledged. I mean, Marco Rubio's speech, where he tried to lay some sort of groundwork, we had to punch them first because they were going to punch us first. That's pre-crime, pre-retaliation. It's nonsense.
Well, in fact, he was saying that we had to get in first because the Israelis were going to be there first. But the United States underestimates a couple of things. One is the instability. They overestimate the instability of the regime itself. Iran is a very young society. Most of the population do not know what pre-revolutionary times looked like, and we know from history that carpet bombing regimes, killing 180 children on the first day of the attack, only galvanizes people towards the ruling administration, not because they like them necessarily, but because they're the only way they can be. That's the only institution and structure that can protect them from those attacks. So it has the exact opposite effect to the one that Trump seems to have thought he would have, and that is, we'll bomb them a while, the population will rise up, overthrow the regime, and install some pro-Western, pro-Israeli replacement. They've got no alternative opposition leadership in mind. No one has any recognition factors, and it looks like to me as if it's just on a wing and a prayer at this point, that they'll do enough damage to push the Iranian people into some sort of well-organized coup d'etat against their own administration, which you have to understand this about Iran. It is not there's no distinction between the civilian government and the Revolutionary Guard, right? They're completely integrated. So the new supreme leader, who hasn't been announced, but it looks like it's going to be Khatami's son, is effectively chosen by the Revolutionary Guard. These structures are very intensely intertwined, and you can't separate them. They're not like a secular separation of government that you see in Western societies, where you can knock off the political titular leaders and expect just a new government with a completely different political complexion to emerge. It just doesn't work, and it's not going to happen, and it hasn't happened. And now we're left with uncertain goals. What is their objective now? How long are they prepared to fight this, and what will victory look like?
Well,
does it look like Armageddon? Is that what they're aiming for?
Well, I don't think so, because the region's so tightly integrated there that the Israelis want Iran's theocracy gone because it's the prime example of successful defiance. Right? That's the key phrase: successful defiance of the US and Israel. That's why Iran's always been the major target. Sure, there have been proxies around in Hezbollah, and although Hamas is a Sunni organization, there's also the Houthis in Yemen. Yeah. But the real prize was always Iran, because Iran, a country of 92 million people, represented successful defiance of US and Israeli ambitions in the region. So for as long as that theocracy continues, none of the war aims that are fundamentally at the base of what they're doing now will be achieved.
So, Michael, do you think that's right that the US in particular, but Israel as well, kind of fundamentally underestimated the capacity for Iran to retaliate effectively? I mean, clearly the strategy that Iran are now implementing has been a long time in the making. They've known this would be coming one day. So this sort of fanning out and bombing mostly US bases, although as Dave points out, there have been a couple of other sites, including luxury hotels in Dubai, for example, but pretty much concentrating on the bases. So when Trump says, "Oh, they're bombing so many countries," it's only because there are bases in so many countries in the Gulf.
Well, it's a smart strategy, Joe, by Iran, and an obvious one because these are American military bases. So despite all the indignation, it's a viable strategy and it's working at this point. I think when you're looking at this situation, it's an abominable debacle of the highest order. In realpolitik terms, it makes no sense. It's completely stupid. Regime change doesn't work. There's no alternative government, not even a whiff of it. That was a Mossad CIA psyop for 30,000 dead. I would just say, look at the human motivation for this. You've got two blokes at the basis of it. You've got one guy, Netanyahu, whose aspirations are greater Israel. He's on trial for fraud. He doesn't want to go to jail for fraud. He should be at The Hague being tried for war crimes for genocide at Gaza. He is just in survival mode, and he's backed by crazies to the right of the Likud party like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. That's his power base. And as far as Trump goes, it's clear that he's being pushed by Israel. I mean, one benefactor alone, Miriam Adelson, gave him more than $200 million. It's payback. There's probable blackmail. The guy appears from the Epstein files, and it's a huge distraction from the Epstein files. He wants to stay out of jail as well. He's doing everything Israel tells him to do. He's a probable pedophile. And these are the people that we're in. And so Iran is calling it the Epstein Coalition. And their marketing is, of course, superior too, because the marketing of the war by, our heroes on our side is just not there. There's no raison d'etre. There's no Casus belli. There's just nothing except scrambling, and it's very embarrassing for Albanese. The whole of the Australia's political elite, except the Greens, are on board this debacle. And it can't. If you just look so far in the past week, the ASX is down 3 to 5%. Oil prices are up 13 to 15%. We've got 30 days of strategic fuel reserves in Australia. The RBA is now market economists are now talking about 2 interest rate rises this year. So interest rate bond yields, which is the biggest market in the world, US Treasuries, they're going up. So interest rates are going up. It's got oil prices going up, interest rates going up, stocks going down, therefore less income for retiring Australians and so on. It's hard to underscore what an incredible tragedy and abomination this is. And Australia has got to have a look at its foreign policy and do something about it. Times have changed. The world has changed, and we're still stuck in the 20th century Cold War mentality.
Well said, Michael. I wrote this week that, for my mind, this is extremely obviously about greater Israel rather than liberation or democracy or oppression. I don't find any other narrative at all convincing that would explain the Israeli and American actions over the last few years. There is clear evidence. There are maps. It was only August last year when Benjamin Netanyahu said he felt a spiritual mission and he was very committed to the concept of greater Israel. And what is also simultaneously happening is that land is being seized in southern Lebanon. The south of Beirut is being carpet bombed as well.
Yeah.
This fits the pattern of gradual Israeli expansion across the entire region. And under that framework, Iran it doesn't really matter if it's a regime change or not. Causing chaos serves Israeli needs in and of itself, because, as Scott points out, they are the strongest opposition to the Israeli expansion in the region.
I just distinguish between two things. One is greater Israel, yes, but the religious rationale for it is ex post facto. So Netanyahu and Trump are about as religious as I am.
Oh,
Which
definitely.
is not at all. It's an ex post facto rationale for it, and it's not that they necessarily want to settle large numbers of Jews in Iran. It's that Iran was the bloc in the region. It sponsored groups that were a real nuisance to the Israelis. And of course, we know really now the basis of Israel's concerns were not the development of nuclear weapons by Iran, although people are still running with that narrative for some reason. I don't know why. No one believes it. And the CIA have been leaking that denial for days and days now. The real concern for Israel in the short term has been the ballistic missiles of the Iranians, because they're the ones that can undermine civilian morale in Israel. Tel Aviv's a bit of a mess at the moment. It's probably only going to get a fair bit worse. And it's those weapons that they wanted included in the disarmament agreement that was allegedly being negotiated with Witkoff and Kushner with the Omanis. That was their number one concern, get those particularly the hypersonic missiles that can evade the anti-ballistic missile interceptors. So that's what they really wanted to get. They knew that Iran was not near, sufficient enrichment for nuclear weapons.
Well, we were told last June that the whole nuclear program had been entirely obliterated. So
exactly.
It's kind of extraordinary that a few months later we're using that as another fig leaf excuse. Sorry, Scott, keep going.
No, I'm just saying that's their concern, and so that's a blow to the prestige of Israel, the Israelis have been told for years, if not decades, that they're invulnerable to regional enemies, that we will always have the backing of the US, we'll always have the technological edge, but when you get civilian infrastructure smashed to pieces in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem by hypersonic missiles that seem to come all the time. The difference between now and last June is that the Iranians are almost running a 24-hour cycle on these missiles. They've now announced in recent hours that they've now run through all their old technology drones and they're moving into the more recent and more sophisticated weapons that they've developed. And that constant vulnerability, it reminds Israel that some of the lies they've been told by their political leaders over the years are not being well received. If you have to spend days and nights in these shelters without any sense of relief or any end point arriving in the short term, you're going to get awfully sick of it. And we're already seeing some footage coming out of people who have put tents in car parks and in underground shelters saying, okay, we've been putting up with this for 5 days now, times, when is it going to end?
Well, because there's just Sorry, Michael, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, having put Gaza through 2.5 years of it, there's not a lot of sympathy for them in the world. But I might just quickly, Joe, sorry to interrupt.
No, please. No, I was going to come to you anyway.
Of media censorship. It's been extraordinary to see. Obviously, Facebook and Instagram are a lost cause. TikTok in the US, lost cause, completely owned by the Zionists, controlled. But X, Elon Musk's thing, formerly Twitter. Now, that has been so disappointing because it seems every bit of live footage that comes up that's posted about the destruction in Israel is wiped immediately by Elon's teams of censors, and Grok, him having so assiduously, marketed his Grok. Now Grok has been programmed to tell lies as well, so everybody's just laughing at Grok. So the issues, it's hard to envisage what really is going to end up coming out of this because it's speeded history up in a sense. We've seen Iran giving at the moment the Epstein allies, a whipping, and being seen by most of the world to be on the right side of the history, because despite what you think about the Ayatollahs, they haven't invaded anybody for 300 years. In America and Israel invaded 8 countries last year alone.
Mhm.
So, but the muzzling of the media is spectacular to watch. And what you've got to do is go on X and go latest Tel Aviv, and then you see the video of it's terrible what's going on there. But suddenly that gets wiped by the censors. So the issue with the internet, of course, is that it's like the blob. You punch it in one place, it comes out in the other place, so you can't control it. And so there's going to be alternatives. So the survival of everybody is on the line in this war.
I think. Sorry,
Sorry.
a very good illustration is the murder of those 180 kids, which now the New York Times this morning has basically, confirmed was a U.S. attack, multi-missile attack. Now, this, of course, has been denied on X as being a false flag operation by the Iranians. Well, that's been exposed now. But the real worry about that is that it appears to have been an AI targeted attack. And these AI programs are not getting the human supervision they should. So they're allowing AI to basically determine the targeting of some of these strikes without confirming them manually with human beings as well. And so we're now being told that the strike was based on old maps. As one of the Iranian spokesmen said, yes, we moved the school recently, just to get it into the wrong place. They've clearly, when you start effectively subcontracting your targeting to an AI program without human supervision, this is just the very first example, I think, of a catastrophic mistake, which undermines entirely the US argument and the Israeli argument that they don't target civilians. I mean, in the very first day they did. So they've got nothing to complain about the Iranians targeting high-rise buildings in Tel Aviv or hotels in Dubai, which actually are playing host to US service personnel who have evacuated from their appears to have evacuated from their bases. So they've got nothing to complain now. They've lost the moral high ground in the very first day of the strike. Which, by the way, they won't call it a war now. They're using Putin's technology. It's a terminology. It's a special operation. They're refusing to call it a war because if he calls it a war, he has to go to Congress and get approval.
I will just say before I come to you, Dave, there was like the greatest of ironies when you had Israeli officials standing in front of some buildings that had been targeted in Tel Aviv saying this is a blatant abuse of international law. And you thought, sorry, international, what was that? Dave?
Yeah. Who the fuck are you to say that kind of thing? I think is the reasonable reaction to that. I don't think there's a reasonable argument to be made that the American strike on the girls' school wasn't deliberate. I think it quite clearly was. I think we've witnessed the same depravity for the last 2.5 years. They're telling us who they are. Just back to Michael's point, it's a great tweet that I saw this week. Remember those great tweets? Twitter is so bad, I'm watching the news to get the news. And that is, it's just obscene. And while we're talking about the news being horrific, did you guys see the Washington Post put out an article this week, and the headline was, "In the long run, wars make us safer and richer." And I just can't think of a better argument for tearing the billionaires apart at this point.
That's perhaps a product of what the Washington.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's probably one of the consequences of the Washington Post basically sacking its entire foreign correspondence team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Michael, can I just pick up on your point about AI? Because we read in the business pages that spilled over into the news pages this skirmish that was happening within the Pentagon and with Trump about the AI companies. And it was, is it what was it called? Anthropic, who said, no, you know what, we're not going to let you have access to all of our data in order to start developing these sort of ongoing surveillance and military targeting. But there was OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, who stood up and said, we'll do it. which just further has boosted the campaign that started in the US at the moment, Quit GPT, saying do not use ChatGPT because it is actually directly enriching a company which is allowing these sorts of war crimes to happen using their technology.
Well, it has to be, and to refer to Scott's point too about the AI targeting, I mean, that will set the war off to such a bad start for the Epstein coalition, because they lost their moral authority in the first day, gone.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the sinking of the submarine out of the peaceful, unarmed Iranian boat, 4,000 Ks coming back from a show from India. I mean, with 3 Aussies on board, although fair enough, they weren't part of the decision-making process. But yeah, look, that has to be regulated. It has to be regulated, and AI. But the problem at the moment is that you don't have, the organs of government are so weak. The Department of Justice, they can't even prosecute pedophiles. You know, the organs of government are so weak and so infiltrated by the political branches of government. Same deal in Australia, really, if you look at corporate regulation or whatever, that they don't have the capacity, the wherewithal now. Democracy is in a terrible position. There's not enough independence and will in these branches of government, these agencies and these departments, to do what they should be doing. It absolutely needs to be regulated. If AI is not regulated, it will be used as the excuse for every atrocity, and it will start producing atrocities of its own, for which nobody will be responsible, because we'll just say, oh, well, that's AI. You know?
Yep, I think they're calling the schoolgirls attack the death by Claude. Now, is Claude Anthropic? I'm not sure. I think it might be before they sort of took it off the shelf. But they're basically describing these atrocities as being, as Michael correctly says, as being somehow completely separate from any human volition.
Absolutely. And if you don't put human beings in jail, if you don't investigate them and pursue them legally, if nobody is responsible, if you've got this corporate veil of directors saying, oh, we're just directors, we're not responsible, if nobody's put in jail for these things, for the murder of 170 schoolgirls and so on, if nobody's tried, there's no human consequence, then it just erodes the authority of government even more. And the authority of government is now around the world at all-time dangerous lows.
Well, talking about authority of governments being at lows, it was really quite incredible that it was the Australian government that was the very first cab off the rank to come out in support of this war. Now, language was used very carefully, but it was all about, isn't it great that we're getting rid of the Ayatollah? Isn't it great that the people of Iran can look to a different kind of future? It is left, obviously, to Israel and the US to talk about the legal basis for it, which everyone knows isn't there at all. But Albanese held a press conference before anybody else and spoke in much more positive terms about the war than really any other national government. Scott, what do you make of that?
Well, it was bizarre as well as being crazy. There's two different things there. The bizarre thing is, I know from an earlier life when I was in the Foreign Affairs Department that the Senator Wong would have received a legal briefing, which would have been very brief and to the point, and describing the attack on Iran as clearly a breach of the UN Charter, Article 2, I think subsection 4, and an act of aggression, a war crime, and there was really no argument. And it was illegal because no one actually mounted a legal argument for it. Unlike, say, in 2003, when we had months and months of legal debates about preemptive strikes and preventative wars and that sort of thing. We had none of that. And the reason for that is because it's a very clear case. It was an act of aggression and illegal. So for Senator Wong, when asked about this, to say, well, you go and ask the Americans and the Israelis, but we endorse it anyway.
Yeah, it's ludicrous.
It's really quite bizarre. I mean, she knows it's illegal. She knows it's an act of aggression. She won't say it. She puts the onus back on them. But then again, she knows enough to say, well, we support it anyway.
How is that not Penny Wong doing anything other than just signalling Australian subservience?
It's not. But it's
Yeah.
also saying our previous position of supporting the importance of international law and international institutions, for which countries like Australia, as small and medium-sized countries, are disproportionately dependent upon, because we can't project the same levels of power across the world that other states can, and we're going to suddenly undermine our entire previous commitment to
Well, it
that. I
was
mean, that was one thing that Labor could pin themselves on. That's why they recognised Palestine when they did. They actually appealed to international legal precedents, international law, the United Nations system. Now they've decided, well, that's just optional now. We'll just sort of park that somewhere else, and we're happy to support an illegal strike on a country which doesn't threaten us.
and it was notable this week.
Scott,
Sorry, can I just say it was notable that because Mark
Yeah.
Carney was here in Australia this week, and Albanese and Carney were standing next to each other, and Carney didn't have the sort of scruples about saying there is no basis in law for this. There's an interesting comparison to be made between leaders like Mark Carney in Canada, Albanese here, and Keir Starmer. Visiting this week from the UK was Ian Dunt, who many of you will know as the British correspondent on Late Night Live, had a chat with Philip and now with David. He was due to be speaking at Adelaide Writers' Week, which was the reason for his visit. So he had some spare time, of course, after the debacle that was that cancellation. So came in and had a chat with us at the Shot, really looking at the two leaders of Starmer and Albanese and their similarities and differences. We'll go to that, and then we'll come back and talk more broadly about those three leaders and what they mean for their respective peoples. I guess a key difference in their journey into politics is that Albanese has always been a political man and actually was the backroom guy in his early days. He's been a leader of the left faction. He's the one manoeuvring around doing the deals. Whereas Keir Starmer came to politics later in life, entered Westminster when he was 50 odd, and he has relied on the support of some of these backroom players to assume the leadership. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. He doesn't really have that much politics
Yeah.
in the party political sense.
Yeah.
I think that deep down there is a sort of political instinct in him, and it's a pretty decent one. I mean, he was a human rights lawyer. He, helped with litigation against McDonald's when they were sort of prosecuting demonstrators against them. There'd be these stories that, when he was quite young, he and his friends were sort of living above a sort of, not quite a brothel, but like a sort of massage parlor. And they would sort of find him giving legal advice to the women that worked in it. Like there's a
Right.
real kind of sense,
Yeah.
really gentle, pleasant sort of sense of social justice to him. That a lot of us, I think, before we came to power, were kind of banking on that
Yes.
flowering in office,
Mm.
which you shouldn't do. You should
No.
you should believe what they say in opposition because they probably will be that prime minister.
Yeah.
And spoilers, it has not flowered in office. It's not been that at all. But he was never really that interested in the politics, the factional politics, the party politics, the ideological politics, any of the kind of like the taxonomy of political tribalism that you see, in the kind of circles that you and I probably mix in, frankly. So he's never
Yes.
been interested in any of that, and he's still not interested in it now. And rather than being a good thing, as I originally thought that might be, it turned out to be an absolute disaster.
And part of that disaster is because then he has relied on the backroom manoeuvrings of certain types that were already players in Labor politics, this so-called blue Labor, if you like, and people like Morgan McSweeney, who we've heard about in Australia, probably only recently as prominently in relation to Mandelson.
I think what happened with Starmer was that he basically outsourced his political brain to strategists. What I hadn't counted on, what I got completely wrong, is the extent to which someone like that would feel so vulnerable on the tribal and the electoral politics that they would find one person to just say, can you just deal with all that stuff for me? And he did. And that guy was Morgan McSweeney.
So look, Starmer becomes Prime Minister with a huge majority, but a bit like Albanese's second term, which is similarly large, there is this sense that the foundations are made of sand and that it was much more of a vote against the corruption and the general incompetence of the Conservatives rather than a warm embrace of Labor.
I think that, I mean, look, I think that's true. The trouble is that we're talking about big majorities in two very different electoral systems.
Yes, indeed.
And so, you know, I think it's a real credit to Albanese, to be honest, that he secured. I think it's a credit in both cases, but it's just a different strategic approach.
Yes,
So
it needs to
in
be.
first past the post, you are not trying to rack up the most votes. We actually don't care in the British system how many people vote, really. We're completely uninterested in the popular will. What we assess is the most efficient geographical distribution of the vote.
Yes.
What you're trying to do is win as many local races as you can by the smallest amount, because that means you're not wasting resources that could otherwise have been dedicated to another race.
Yeah, right.
So actually your perfect electoral strategy involves doing what Starmer did, which is winning a lot of seats by a whisper-thin majority. And because that is a sensible way to approach an election, people will then say, oh, it's very weak. You know, his majority is very weak. I mean, journalists say this in Britain all the time because it's so flimsy in each seat. But actually, that is a strategy that you would consciously pursue if you were pursuing these things in the most rational way possible.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that sort of agitates against a very, you know, all of your dynamics are different when you change the electoral system. So, for instance, all of our conversations in Britain now are about splitting progressive votes. That's what that Green thing is. And that's less of a concern, you know, in the Australian case, and even less of a concern, even more when you get to sort of more proportional systems.
Yeah, no. But so that is going to be interesting, just a little digression, for the next election, because now people have seen that the Greens can actually win.
Yes.
So this idea that you don't want to vote Greens because you don't want to split the vote, or where is it tactful to vote Lib Dems versus, you know, obviously the Scottish nationalists in Scotland and those sorts of things. There's going to be a different equation for the Greens now that they see that there are some seats which previously they might not have thought they would win, that they've been able to overtake, well, not just Labor, but Reform and the whole stable.
It's a real, like, first past the post benefits the two main parties.
Yeah.
Until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the reason it benefits them is exactly that calculation that you're asking, right? So there's loads of people that would want to vote Green or Socialist Party or something. And they just think like, well, I want to, but I don't want to let the Tories in.
Yeah.
And there's the same process happens on the right. But basically, this has been a problem, much more of a problem for the left than it has the right, because there's a greater number of parties and because the left enjoys killing each other. And
They do, of course. That's part of our pastime.
Minor doctrinal disputes.
Yeah.
That we will take to a murderous level.
Indeed, we will. Exiled forever, out.
And so on that basis, it tended to just force people into just pick the Labour option.
Yeah.
Well, that's where it's going to work. As soon as a party has proof of concept that they can take those votes, as Reform now have on the right, to the absolute ruination of the Conservative Party, a process that's not unlike what's happening here.
Indeed.
It looks like it might happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Or the extent to which the Greens can say it on the left, that then becomes existential. People start to believe that becomes existential. The thing is, it could still be ruinous for the left in general. Where can the Greens win? Around urban centres. They're heavily clustered votes. And the kind of places that I live. Basically.
Yeah. Or I live too. Let's be honest.
Like North London, it's Bristol, it's Manchester. Very urban.
Yeah.
Very, very diverse. Large ethnic minority community. Large numbers of ethnic minorities in the community, large numbers of university graduates in the community. These are the key attributes that you look for, and they'll be able to win in those seats. But in most seats aren't like that. And if lots of left-wing voters vote Green in seats that aren't like that, in towns, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Because enough of them can vote Green that would take away from the Labour vote that would allow the Conservatives to come to the middle.
I mean, there was a moment where...
Sorry, that would allow Reform to
the Conservatives, they're toast. Yeah. There was a moment that Starmer and Labor were talking about electoral reform when they had kind of big policy ideas and potential agendas. But a lot of these do seem now to have been subsumed more into the McSweeney style of perpetual campaign.
Yeah, he's not. He's never really. He just doesn't care about electoral reform. And, you know, honestly, Labour has just been, we're just awful on that issue. Because the truth is that sometimes, and I mean awful, you know, you can go right back to the sort of early part of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And they're just not interested. What they want is a majority. They don't want to share power with another party all the time. They want a big majority. And then you get 1945, you know, the year just after the Second World War, the Labour government sort of does everything, essentially creates modern Britain. You know, the NHS, the welfare system. It's sort of this, it's the most successful Labour government in British history.
Yeah.
And that basically involved having a full majority. And so that then gets so baked into the Labour mindset. And then also, again, to go back to that doctrinal point, Labour doesn't hate anyone as much as it hates other progressives. You know, like,
No.
despite, like, you look at, Jonathan, look at Starmer's statement after the Green victory. He spent the last, this is what breaks my mind. He spent the last year and a half basically saying the nicest thing was about reform voters. You know, any voter, especially if they're working class, who happens to really hate immigrants, they literally called them internally hero voters. The voters you could bring over from, you know, from the right of the cultural war into the Labour fold. They love them. They will never say anything that upsets them. He will literally, if he could go out wearing the Union flag, he would do it. You know, and he probably sleeps in it right now. You know, if you were to show him on social. And yet, when his own voters, the actual coalition that put him in power, then say, you know what, I don't like you talking this way, I'm going to vote Greens. The statement he put out was just astonishingly vitriolic and mean-tempered and just pure bad loser territory. You know, people have voted for division. They voted against competence. He would never in a million years talk about reform voters in those ways. But people, you know, left-wingers voting for someone other than Labour, they'll be talked about in the most disparaging terms.
And that is very similar to Albanese, I have to say, is that one of the, you know, he loathes the Greens. They really get under his skin. And even some of the more progressive independents. We've got Senator David Pocock, who used to be a star rugby player. You may have known him through that. But he's now turned politician. He's the most considered decent man probably in Parliament. And yet, because he's gone up against Albanese on some traditionally progressive areas, you know, gambling reform is big on climate, these sorts of issues, Albanese is saying he's the politics of grievance. That's what he's about. And
Wow.
it's just extraordinary. I mean, to say that about someone like David Pocock when here you actually have the politics of grievance playing out in all sorts of ways is extraordinary. So there are these similarities which are interesting between Albanese and Starmer in terms of this sort of seeking to pacify the lost right-wing voters, trying to draw them back into the fold, being sort of anti-progressive, and then saying, regardless of how effective it is as a policy platform, that if you're in the centre and you're pissing off both the left and the right, then you're doing good. But often that does mean you're not engaging with big political problems and policy problems of our time. And similarly, Starmer seems to be with this perpetual campaign, not now, despite his knowledge of the problems of Brexit, really dealing with the aftermath of Brexit, being bold on climate change. From your observation coming into Australia, do you see those sorts of similarities that we, who probably observe Britain more closely, although I know you do, being on Late Night Live, than British commentators often observe Australia?
So I do see quite a few. So, but I would almost say the most generous thing about two of them. I think that the economic agenda has been, I mean, in Australia, it's much more successful than in the UK. And we would kill, I mean, I'm not saying your level of growth is, you know, sci-fi exactly. It's pretty pedestrian, but we would kill for it.
Yeah, right.
We would
Yeah.
happily take a slice of that.
Yeah.
And the same with minerals, etc.
Yeah.
With mineral wealth. So, I would say the labour market reforms from Albanese, like good, solid left wing.
Yeah, I must say industrial reform is an area where he kind of kept the faith with the
Right.
progressive voters.
So Starmer has broadly similar, I mean, strengthened sort of sectoral bargaining, you know, day one rights to sort of kill sort of insecure work, The idea being that would also stimulate demand. The more stability people
Yep.
have in their work, the more reliability of the pay packet, the more they'll spend, that this is a benign kind of economic cycle that you go into. I'd say the same, by the way, with climate change. Actually, climate change is the one area of really, really ambitious policymaking going on
Right,
for
okay.
Labour in Britain.
And that has been bipartisan in the UK
Until now.
Right, okay.
Yeah, never. I mean, basically, I think my rule is if you ever have anything nice to say about the mainstream right, just be very careful because
Yes.
they will find a way of disappointing
Yes,
you.
okay.
So each
Yeah.
time, I think the only thing that has really remained bipartisan that has worked has been Ukraine.
Yeah.
And even there, because Farage is essentially
Yeah.
at the very
Putin's
least sympathetic with Putin,
Yeah.
exactly, and Trump, who has his own, specific dynamic. He's starting to peel away that, but it doesn't really work. You could tell with the public. The public really are very, very pro-Ukrainian. You walk down a normal British street, you will see Ukrainian flags. You know what I mean? There's no the Tories, Labour. There's no real distinction there. But on pretty much everything else, they'll let you down, and have been with alarming regularity. So I think all of that. I do think that when we just take the economics, we see a pretty solid record there on both sides, where they, I think, pretty much lived up to most of the talk that came before. But I think the similarity that we see is primarily sort of character, sensibility,
Mm.
sort of instinct. I mean, it's not surprising they get on.
Yeah.
Because you look at them and you be like, you look like you'd get on.
Yeah, you do. They sort of mutually reinforce each other's kind of caution and approach.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, when Albanese was sort of basically rolled out for the Labour Party
Yeah.
conference, it wasn't really the left can win thing. It was more stick with the boring specky.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of time and it might work out for you. It worked out,
Yeah, yeah.
in my neck of the woods. Which is, I mean, you can understand why that's the argument that he's making in that context. It's a pretty good one to make. I think they even go back in terms of the music stuff, but they both have a much more interesting musical taste and musical background than you might think listening to them. And when you see, I mean, obviously, Joy Division, or in other words, the terrible, what is it, Nazi apology. Yeah,
It's just like, oh my God.
But nevertheless, that you see that same thing in Starmer's past with music. He's like really interested in his rock music. He really gets his rock music. He understands it. So actually, the similarities go pretty deep with those guys. But I think that primarily it is about personality rather than something more structural and strategic.
Yeah. And of course, Starmer faced a bit of an existential moment recently, which led to the departure of the much trusted Morgan McSweeney. That seems to now have passed because, of course, the news cycle has moved on, being swamped by Iran. What do you think will now happen to Starmer and his office and his political instincts, given that McSweeney has departed?
Well, I mean, we still have to think that he'll go in May. Although so in May there's local elections, and lots of Labour MPs are kind of holding back, waiting for those results before you do anything.
Really? So there could well be
That's the
a
expectation.
Starmer departure.
That's the expectation, is that the attack on him will be pretty severe in the wake of those May election results, which we expect to be terrible. If they're not, this won't happen, but they will be, so it probably will.
And so because, I mean, Angela Rayner obviously was a big loss, authentic from the working class voice, but she's still lurking around. Burnham was kept out, wasn't allowed to stand in the Gordon and Denton by-election that was just held, and that was seen to be a defensive action by Starmer. So if the move comes, who will it be?
It could be a wild card, but the chances are it will be between Wes Streeting on the right, the kind of Blairite mold, and Angela Rayner on the left, the kind of more trade union mold. I don't think, by the way, those descriptions are really fair to either of them. I think they're both actually much more interesting than that.
Yeah.
And I think they're both really quite impressive politicians and quite unusual. Their backgrounds are unusual, really hard knock backgrounds in both cases.
Yeah.
And they both have a kind of fluency in their communication, which is actually quite unusual in Westminster, where people have sort of learned to just have this kind of passive tense management guff that switches people up instantly. I think it probably would come down to them, but I have to confess, one of the reasons that Starmer is still in place is Labour MPs are looking at the alternatives and thinking, I don't know if that cuts it really. Streeting connected to Peter Mandelson, it's like a weeping sore, really. I mean, that is a severe possibly a mortal blow,
Yeah.
just having that connection. Rayner, I think for a lot of them, Labour's instinct always is, God, don't turn left. Because if you turn left, I mean, they do it, obviously, but the people that do it are the kind of like the militant left wingers, right? Like the people that actually, the majority of the party, it's like, no, hang on a minute. The one lesson we always learn is you
Yeah.
never swing left.
Yeah.
Right.
Corbyn. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. Michael, you look
Yeah.
at a lot
Yeah.
of their history. Um, she is much more canny though
Yeah.
than people recognize. And shit. Like her, one of the toughest battles internally in British government is how do you take on the Treasury? Can't do it publicly, you do it internally, you hold them back, you save your budgets, you make the case. If you can't make it with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, go up, you make it with PM, or maybe in case of emergency break glass, you go to the press and see if you can get some kind of campaign that stops the Chancellor from slashing your budget. She was really impressive taking on the Treasury. That is not the action of a Jeremy Corbyn, who
Yeah.
strategically couldn't find his own arsehole in the
Yeah.
dark. You know what I mean? I mean, this, that is the action of someone who strategically knows exactly how to approach an issue to get what she needs out of it. She is much, much smarter than people realize. And one of the reasons they don't realize she's smart is because of her accent, because she was a single mum.
Yeah.
And so they undermine, that they think very little of her. Whereas in fact, if you were to put all of her actions in the body of a posh white male, they would consider her a kind of tactical genius.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Well, we'll keep our eyes on British politics come May. Albanese, I think he's entirely safe. He will leave at a time of his choosing, but some people will think he'll be sitting on that veranda listening to Joy Division perhaps sooner than we think, but I think not until after the next election. Ian, thank you very much for coming and joining us on the Sunday Shot. It's great to have you on. Enjoy the rest of your time here in Australia. So, Michael, interestingly, Ian seems to be completely convinced that Keir Starmer's days are numbered and that he could lose his hold on the prime ministership in the UK as soon as May. Albanese's not at any risk, despite the sort of despondency that a lot of people feel about his ongoing leadership. But Mark Carney seems to be a bit of a rock star. He seems to have broad international support post his Davos speech. What's your take on those respective leaders and how they are navigating their roles as prime ministers?
Well, I think the underlying sort of fable here, Joe, is that authenticity is extremely important when you're in power and you're in politics. And, that's what the rise of Hanson, because she might be completely stupid, but she's authentic. People really believe she wants to cut migration and that migration is the problem to all our woes.
Authentically
Wrong, of
stupid.
course. It's epically wrong and boneheaded. But the fact is that authenticity is very important in the media and politics. And people are looking for leadership. And when they look at the situation going on now, they're going, this is bad. And Albanese at the moment is backing the Epstein coalition. Starmer has tried to claw that back. He's seen the writing on the wall and gone, well, actually, we're not going to go full tilt behind this campaign. And he got a little bit credit for doing that. And Carney, of course, by standing up to Trump and saying Canada's not going to fall in line with the US, by actually standing up and doing the right thing. And, it's the schoolyard bully thing. And we're all the friends of the schoolyard bully. And it's as simple as that. And our people, do you notice global rules-based order? Penny Wong, we never hear Penny or Albo going on about global rules-based order. That's already gone. That's out of the lexicon. But it's authenticity. And we should be standing up to these people and going, that is wrong. We are not going to get involved with this. I think it's quite simple. And the longer this drags on, the worse it's going to be for all three leaders. Because Carney, of course, while a bit of a rock star, he has given his imprimatur to the attacks on Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting that on Palestine, the Albanese government waited to do it in unison with the New Zealanders, with some of the Europeans, with the UK and others. In other words, they didn't want to stand out and be on his own. He wanted political cover from the usual suspects in the Anglosphere, if you like. On this occasion, he's completely abandoned that approach and stuck his neck out without that. And, let's face it, to be outflanked by Keir Starmer on international law and morality is not the kind of thing you want to stamp on your head. I mean, he basically, the only time Starmer's ever had good press over the last 12 months is when he went into the parliament and said the war was a breach of international law.
Yeah.
Up until then, he was just being creamed, and he may not be there in May. It may all be too late. But Albanese didn't wait. He didn't wait for any coverage from, like-minded states, the group that he normally moves in unison with. He just went ahead and backed it unilaterally. So there's been I don't know the reason, but there's been a significant shift in the approach on this issue as opposed to the issue of Palestine. Now, maybe there's not as much backlash expected from no backlash expected from the Americans on this occasion, so it makes it easier to do. But it's a significantly different tactic when compared with only a few months ago on Palestine, when he dragged his feet until he got some kind of collective vote at the UN General Assembly, where all like-minded states pretty much fell into line with him.
Yeah, well, he had cover because he was expecting kind of backlash. Yeah, Dave.
I mean, that recognizing Palestine at the UN, I also think was largely a narrative pivot. I maintain skepticism of how powerful that is while it's being carpet bombed into oblivion. And that was happening at a moment in time where the public was getting furious. We were seeing skeletal children constantly rolling out of Gaza. I do feel that was largely a narrative pivot. Albanese, with this one, the enthusiasm to get back on board the fascist genocide train, I think that shows that he's not feeling at all concerned about an electoral backlash because the opposition is so weak. This is such an unpopular stance to take amongst the general public.
Well, the duopoly supports it.
Yeah, our system is failing us in this moment. I don't think this is about the individuals. I think it is the systems we have in place, and they're not.
You're right. Absolutely right. And he knows that the backlash, domestic backlash, won't come from within the political elite or the parliament. It's more likely to come, if it goes on, if the conflict goes on and on, it's more likely to come from the ALP base, which is what pressured him to
have to get Doug
shift
back on
on
the
Palestine
show.
in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, and look, it's interesting as well.
It's anecdotal, but I get so many comments from I've been going this government quite hard over the last few months, and I have literally thousands of replies saying, I used to vote for the Labor Party, never again. It is anecdotal, but I'm sure that is recurring sentiment in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just about to start publishing a series by Andrew Brown, the son of the former long-term Labor minister, and apparently the oldest Labor Party member in Australia. We're talking Labor diehards here, and I've seen the same, Dave. All the feedback is our families voted Labor for 3 generations, no longer da-da-da. Things are changing pretty rapidly. But ultimately, I think if we look at what the real problem is behind all this, it is the state of Israel. It's the government of Israel. And when you don't stand up to people doing the wrong thing, and people have appeased them locally in our domestic politics, internationally with Trump and Iran now, Israel is the problem. I'll get hit by it for being anti-Semitic to say it, but the anti-Semitism stuff has worn thin. There's plenty of good Jewish people against the regime in Israel. It is the state of Israel which is the problem. It's the tail wagging the dog of our foreign policy, of our domestic policy with regards to freedom of speech. Here we are spending all this money on royal commissions and on university monitors of anti-Semitism and so on. Well, these people are blowing up the world and blackmailing the American leadership. Israel is the problem, and until there is regime change in Israel, there cannot be peace. There needs to be justice too before there's peace, which means trying the people that are responsible for the genocide.
I'm not sure that regime change in Israel is enough. We have lots of data that suggests that this is a fairly Nazified state at this point. 87% of people in Israel support the ethnic cleansing of Gaza completely. That's That's an acceptance of barbarism that we've normalized. And, Ilan Pappy warned about this decades ago, that the way their education system is geared, the way they teach history to themselves, you can't do anything other than generate a state full of narcissistic psychopaths with a victim complex that have been desensitized to violence. And I worry this is a much wider spread problem than just the Netanyahu government.
Well, it is, but it's got the one thing that you have to remember is it's never going to get any better for Israel than it does now. And I'm referring here to the United States. Whatever comes after Trump won't be matching his level of enthusiasm for Israel's geostrategic and geopolitical ambitions. So this is one of the reasons why when Joe asked what the timing of all this is, the Israelis know that there is a window that will close on these opportunities. And if you don't take the advantage and opportunities as they arise, they may not come back to you. So it's never, I'm not saying that I have no faith in the Democrats taking a radically different line, but I think the Democrats internally will be under enormous pressure when they look at the opinion polls, particularly of young Jews in North America, on the East Coast in particular, where the support for Palestine has flipped from 42% pro-Israel to 42% pro-Palestine. That's a huge shift in a pretty short space of time. Now, at some point, that's going to translate through to the pre-selection of candidates within the Democratic establishment. They may not like it. They'll resist it for a while, but ultimately they know that one thing they do want is power. And if they want to get it back into power, they're going to have to listen to that base. So the Israelis know this. They're very clever. They know exactly what they're doing here, and they know that the window will close once Trump, particularly if Trump gets bogged down with Epstein files. There's been a new release of those in the last 10 hours, I think, of hidden, previously undisclosed interviews with victims of Mr. Trump. Now, if his last year and a half of office is bogged down with sexual scandal, just like Bill Clinton's was, and just like George W. Bush's was with Iraq, the Israelis know that they have a very limited window in which to achieve what they want. So it's never going to get any better for them than it is now, regardless of what they might think about the world. And they have to strike now, literally.
I think you're right, Scott. I would just add some skepticism to the DNC being able to change their institution from within. We just saw the drop side story that confirmed what I think we all suspected, that post Kamala Harris's failed campaign, they did an internal inquiry and found that the chief reason they didn't do better was their support for the Gaza genocide. And the Democrats kept that report secret. They didn't want that to get out. I think that speaks to a deep institutional commitment on the side of the Democrats to the state of Israel, which is something they need to grapple with if they're going to be an actual resistance and opposition to this fascist crap.
Perhaps that's where the Liberal Party learned to suppress their internal report about what went wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Now tabled
first
by
thing you know
Albanese
when just parenthetically, does anyone really in the Liberal Party not think that the minute you put a ban on the publication of a document that has wide public interest, that someone is not going to leak it and make you look much worse than if you actually offered it up in the first place?
Particularly when you're as factionally riven.
Michael can explain this.
We have reached the end
bizarre.
Of another show, I have to say. Before we go, as ever, I will ask our panelists if they have any top tips, anything that has caught their eye particularly or that they are keeping an eye on for the week ahead. Michael, any top tips from you?
Well, I think Scott has just flagged one of them, and that is that the Epstein. I've seen some stuff come through that you couldn't even tweet.
Right.
It's pretty gruesome stuff, and I've had a deep dive in the Epstein files anyway. There is more gruesome stuff coming out. It doesn't look like, my top tip would be that it doesn't look at this point, even though both sides would desperately like out of this war, my tip is the Iranians can't because they know that if they don't really go hard at this point in time, Israel and America will come back in another few years' time and hit them again. They really have, and there's a lot of people cheering for them around the world to stop these American and Israeli wars, this endless war machine. There's a lot of money behind the war machine, which is a problem. You look at the dollars behind it; it's just immense. There's a lot of impetus from people in people's ears in politics and bureaucracy. But my tip will be it's looking pretty inextricable at this point, unless Trump just decides to walk away. But with the Epstein stuff coming, he needs the distraction.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of mine. One is that when you're faced with an existential crisis, you'll do desperate things. So, the Iranians have been fairly rational in their response thus far. But if your very existence is now on the chopping board, don't be surprised if they do something more extreme than anyone was anticipating, given that that's their survival's at stake. And the other one is, even if the war ended tomorrow, the costs of rebuilding the Gulf, the clearing the Straits of Hormuz, getting the ships reinsured by Lloyd's of London, and ensuring that getting the petrol price or oil price down again is going to take some time. So even if everything stopped tomorrow, there would be a significant lag before we'd see the relief coming from it. And as Michael said, 2 interest rates coming anticipated by the governor of the Reserve Bank is not going to do Mr. Albanese and Mr. Chalmers any favours.
Well, no, and you'd have to think that there will be some serious pushback.
Buy the tin food this afternoon in the shopping now, Scott.
You'd have to think there will be some serious pushback domestically on the political front amongst the electors and voters, that is, not amongst, obviously, the political class, for Trump as well. Dave, top tip from you?
Just 2 quick little tidbits. Less than 30% of Americans support this war at the moment. And when wars are that unpopular, one of the patterns from history is we do see false flag attacks to bolster bloodthirstiness. So everyone should be quite diligent about this sort of thing. And the other thing is, earlier this week, I chatted with Indigenous activist and academic legend Gary Foley, and we had a long chat about things which will come out here at some point. But he was very much of the opinion that the ALP has been infiltrated by Zionists since Gough Whitlam's days, basically, and he was extremely skeptical of the party and its commitment to humanitarian values.
Well, there we go. Well, my top tip is tied up with the fact that I will not be here next week. Dave is going to be wrangling things for you in the Sunday shop because my arts job is getting pretty busy because I have a show coming to you at the Adelaide Fringe. So my top tip is buy a ticket to FUCCBOIS live in concert at the Adelaide Fringe or the Melbourne Comedy Festival, because it is a real hoot of a show by an unbelievable talent in Bridie Connell. It is a parody of boy bands, and it sticks it to the patriarchy, but in a very fun way.
Slow fade, girl, goodbye. Wanna ignore you, never tell you why. Slow fade, now you're in your head, wondering if it was something that you said. Slow fade, slow fade, slow fade, slow fade, slow fade, slow fade.
So that is it for us for another week. Thank you very much to Michael and to Scott for joining us to dive into the hell that is the Iranian war. Thank you to our audience for watching us. As ever, please like, subscribe, do those things, and even throw us some money if you can as we're approaching the end of the financial year. That will all be very handy to us. But otherwise, Dave, we'll see you next week, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all.